Welcome to Culture Crush with me, your host, Dan Dowman, where we get to meet some of the world's leading culture shapers, future makers, and power shakers. Today's episode is brought to you by Anthem, and as always, we'll be talking groundbreaking cultures, leadership challenges, and what you can do about them. Today on the show, I'm joined by Andy Goram. Andy, it's so great to have you on the show.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here, my friend. Never pass up the opportunity to have a good old chinwag about this sort of stuff with you. So looking forward to it today. Yeah, really up for it.
Well, I'm delighted that we're finally here because you today are powering through. I know that you've got a bit of a cold, and I want to thank you for showing up because I didn't. Ladies and gentlemen, this is probably the third time we've tried to arrange this podcast, but COVID came back to haunt me. It absolutely smashed me. And so I had a couple of weeks of turning Andy down whilst we were trying to make this episode happen. So Andy, thank you for not doing the same to me.
When you get to my age, you've been turned down plenty of times for all sorts of different reasons. So you get over it. So look, I'm here. I think I sound a little sexier than normal, but if the Jakeman's throat lozenge pops out during the show, please don't worry. It's not like I've lost an organ or something. It's just trying to keep lubricated, my friend, trying to keep lubricated.
Well, I will leave the comments about your sexiness to one side for a moment, but I think you should be feeling very, very self-confident as you turn up for Culture Crush today. And it's so great to have you. Andy, I'm kind of fascinated by your story. You are yourself a founder and you're a podcast host and you're like over 100 episodes, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But Sure. Tell us a bit about your story. Bizjuicer is the name of your business, and it's been going for over 6 years now, and you're making waves in the culture space. But that wasn't always your story. So give us a bit of your background and how you kind of arrived at this idea of this business, Bizjuicer.
Well, I think we're going to end up finding more kindred spirit stuff in this story. But, I came to the people stuff via a marketing perspective. So I had a 27, 28-year career in corporate marketing. So all of my roles had a corporate badge. I've sort of done hotels, leisure, bit of travel, bit of retail, gaming. So bingo is part of that story as well. And I don't think I ever woke up going, do you know what? I really, really need to work in bingo. But that was an amazing time. But for all of that work with a marketing badge, I often found myself sitting between a number of departments. So sitting between the brand, the customer, and the employee, and on behalf of the company, trying to find that universal truth that linked it all. And I guess over the course of my career, I spent, although my finance colleagues may say wasted, millions of pounds trying to convince customers as to why they should buy or come to us, stay with us, recommend us. And ashamedly, in the early part of my career, very little in actually explaining to the people who are delivering that brand experience every day exactly why and what their role is and what they can bring. And until we did that one day, and we did spend a considerable amount of time, effort, and money trying to connect the story to each employee. And honestly, Dan, it's going to sound so twee and cliched, but when we did that, amazing things started to happen. When you started to talk to people like in a bingo club, say, about what they did, you would hear stuff like, I give out chips. And by the way, bingo clubs in the day, we sold a lot of chips, often with gravy, which is a completely different episode content, right? Or they would clean machines or give out change. And yet when you actually watched what they were doing, unconsciously, they are connecting individuals in that club. They're creating friendships. They're forming new bonds with people. And if you go and think about the demographic that's sitting in a bingo club in an afternoon, very often, this is their life. These are the people that they see. And when you sit down and explain that, or even just observe that with them and say, well, you're not shoveling chips, you're sort of banishing loneliness, as an example. You start to see people just sit up a little straighter and the shoulders go back and the chest puffs out, and you watch them walk across the floor and they're just carrying themselves differently. And there's this conscious intention that happens that when you connect what they actually do to what people experience, and I think this is true of businesses. I think when you can connect what drives a business with what drives the people within it, brilliant things happen. And so the latter part of my career, that's really what I focused on. And then I left after an MBO and tried to set up to do my own thing. Initially, I've tried to do marketing. And I think what you realize pretty early on after being a marketing director, CMO, and all the rest of it is that actually pretty rubbish at marketing. I had brilliant people working for me who did all that amazing stuff. My job was to create an environment where they could really be at their best. And so I didn't stick too long at the marketing consultancy. I went back to my passion and roots, which was people, engagement, and culture, and trying to bring those things together. And so I've been doing that in Bizjuicer myself with my own clients. I love the associate model, so I go and help other companies deliver that sort of stuff. A bit of leadership development, a bit of culture, a bit of coaching and mentoring, all these things. I mean, I look back now, this is a gift. It's an absolute joy to get to do what I do today. And then the podcast, on the back of COVID coming along and my appointment book emptying overnight, I figured I hope to try and do something, learn something, keep my passion for this stuff going. And so, put Sticky from the Inside together. And much like you, my friend, I get to speak to some wonderful people from across the globe on the topics of leadership, engagement, retention, productivity, all these amazing, amazing topics. So I'm living my best life.
Well, that's it. Now, I love the anecdote you shared there about the bingo employee who's shoveling chips, suddenly realizing that their role was so much more important than that actually their sort of mission in that little world was to banish loneliness, and how that affected the way they carried themselves across the floor. I really love that example. And I think it's such an important pointer for anybody listening to the show. If you've got a team and actually, maybe those employees are working in a role where it's actually a bit repetitive, or, it's not glamorous in some respects. When you think about that example, and you think about the relationships and the connections that those people are going to be making every day, any job can take on new meaning and be transformed and take on new purpose when you think about it through that kind of lens and think about that anecdote. Go on, you were going to jump in.
No, because I think it's such a great point. I mean, I did some work with a manufacturer, a technical foam manufacturer. So people who do amazing things, cutting foam into all sorts of shapes. And that is a lot of line work, right? Working with CNC machines and cutters and glue and solvent and various bits and pieces, and connecting those employees to tiny little things that they were making that were just like, felt like shards of foam, and telling them the story that these pieces of foam are the things that keep these vaccines or medicines safe from breakage during travel, and what those vaccines are doing to people on the other side of the world. Honestly, it's not like there's some massive transformation that happens, but a little bit more diligence, a little bit more care, and actually a bit even more pride in that. While I'm doing this repetitive motion, actually, I'm having a really positive impact here. So again, it's so dangerous when you talk about these examples to sound like some sort of twee merchant, but this is the reality of it. This is why purpose and understanding and connection is really, really important when you're trying to build a successful culture. And I think this is what puts some people off. It all sounds a bit trite. No. These things have impact. We shouldn't overlook them.
They do. And I think what's really interesting actually is that what you're pointing to are the true stories of those jobs.
Yeah.
The challenge here for any leader isn't to think like, what's the thing that you can say just to pump someone up so they'll work hard at their job? No, what's the true story that you can connect with? Because the bingo hall chip shoveler, right? The true story of their role is that they were connecting with people and banishing loneliness. When you mentioned that kind of like those medical tools and the protective bungs or whatever they were doing, the true story is they're keeping those supplies safe. That is the true story. There's no conjecture in there or amplifying something that's not true. You're just revealing the true story about that person's role. And I had a really great conversation recently with a new friend of mine, Angie Callan. Angie, if you're listening to this, hello. Thank you for coming on the show recently. It was great to have you. And we were having a similar conversation. And one of the anecdotes I mentioned, and I don't know to what extent this story is true. It's been passed down to me over the generations. That sounds quite grand. But I had this story about NASA, who were being really outworked and outsmarted by Russia during the space race. Russia were reaching a lot of firsts first. And so NASA was sitting there thinking, well, we want to be first to put man on the moon, but we're behind in almost every department. So how are we going to do this? And the department heads and the leaders of NASA really went to work with a mindset shift across the organization. So the engineers were no longer like working on a piece of code or just trying to like tweak this microscopically small piece of equipment for a very niche role. They actually started to instill and introduce this idea that you're not just doing the job that's in front of you, you are putting man on the moon. And so when people started to really connect with that bigger mission and really started to feel a sense of ownership of that, that's when they started to accelerate, innovate, create in new ways, work faster together, work smarter together. And of course, we know the end of that story. NASA put the first man on the moon. Now, I guess in contrast, some of the examples that we've been sharing, you could say, well, it's kind of glamorous, working at NASA, but I bet that's not the day-to-day experience for almost every NASA employee who's staring at a computer screen or, working in the minutiae of some ultra technical thing, right? That's still not very glamorous. You might work for a big, cool company, but I'm sure the day-to-day work is still a grind. So back in the 60s, when they introduced this idea of being connected to your broader purpose, the broader purpose that we all share, that's when they unlocked huge impact and huge momentum. So I love how this conversation has started, Andy.
Oh, well, look, this is what we do, mate, isn't it? I mean, I think it's because we both care and are passionate about it. And I think also, I guess we've come a bit from the dark side of marketing, where I think this is where purpose goes wrong. Because I think when it's seen as some sort of marketing device to tell a story that might attract somebody, a consumer, a client, I think that's when it goes wrong. To me, it's about a genuine connection between what are the things that the business is grounded in, rooted in, that really drives it, and how does that connect to what really drives the people within it? And I think finding that connection, that's its primary purpose, to make both those entities perform. It's not about a marketing ploy that sounds amazing on a poster or something like that. I think that's where it fails.
And this could be a whole other episode, so I won't steer us down this path for too long, but you're right. I think in marketing, we do have a troubling relationship with results. The whole language around targeting people, there's this whole vernacular that probably sits quite uncomfortably with us as human beings. But yet we sometimes leave our humanity at the door when we think about like, what's a marketing campaign? How can I go viral? How can I get more eyeballs? How can I grab people's attention? And we're trying to think of ways like, how do I disrupt what this person is doing in their day so I can shove this message down their throat and drive them, stick them in a funnel and make a sale? Like, when we actually stop and think about it, it's probably not very healthy and in harmony with our sense of what it means to be a human being, right? And I wonder if we should perhaps do a different episode on this about kind of the breakdown of what we do in marketing and in business and in storytelling versus who we are as human beings. And what you're talking about is very much on that human being side of saying, no, we need to focus on real connection, real relationship, real opportunities to bring a sense of ownership and mission that can be shared from the consumer and the business side. So it becomes this really powerful, almost divine connection with one another, where it's more of a partnership than a transaction. But, like I say, we could
easily go off on it. But I think as long as we can get away from, we're going to save the world with every biscuit we sell, I think, you're moving in the right direction. Let's think about proper connection, genuine emotion. That's the thing that galvanizes people into action. And actually, we're pretty good at sniffing out crap. If we think it's a bit iffy, we're pretty good at sniffing it out, and therefore we won't commit to it and we won't actually use it for anything longer than the launch day. But you're right, mate. Let's try and park that and move on if we can. Clearly, marketers, we've got this deep-seated issue.
I can't resist. I just want to put it out there. If you are a biscuit seller and Andy's just inspired you and you want to try a campaign, do let us know how it goes, because if you've got a biscuit that's saving the world, we'd love to hear how that campaign went, because that would be fascinating for us to discuss.
Show me I'm wrong, please. Yeah.
Now, I wanted to just ask you about how you knew it was time to make the move into the Bizjuicer universe. Like, you'd been working in marketing, you'd been a storyteller, and you decided that I'm going to try and set up my own operation. But how did you kind of know it was right to move into your own business operation? And how did you also know it was time to sort of leave the marketing side of it behind and kind of press on with that culture and relationship building tone?
I mean, my answer is, will be very honest. I'm not sure it's very exciting, but I think I probably left the marketing stuff behind for quite a while, even in corporate, because I had literally surrounded myself with just brilliant people who knew far more about it than me and technically could deliver their specialisms greater than me. I guess my job was direction. I think the moment, and I think it came as mutual, but I did have a Jerry Maguire moment. I had a curry with a consultant who was in, and at the time we'd done an MBO and we were now sort of multi-channeling. We were really building a multi-channel brand. And the conversation was really good. I really rated this guy. And I think he sort of had sussed that I was a bit jaded, but it was jaded because I had looked around the exec table and I was pretty much one of the only ones left out of the MBO group. It felt very different. But because of where the business was going, and we've talked about perhaps my connection to more emotional human things, and the world was becoming far more digital. And I actually felt that I wasn't the guy that the organization needed. I certainly didn't think I was the guy the current new CEO needed. I felt that they needed somebody who was more digitally astute, would get very excited and sweaty over sort of percentage increases in PPC and various bits and pieces, which would just destroy me. So I literally did do a bit of a Jerry Maguire and write my colleague, my HR director, a note saying, can we have a chat in the morning, please? Because there's something I need to share. I had a wonderful chat with somebody I respect hugely to this day. And I sort of said, look, I don't think I'm your guy anymore, and blah, blah, blah. And they said, well, what if I said, that's not true, that you are our guy? I'd say, you're being very sweet, but I don't think you're being very honest with yourselves. And literally within about half an hour, I went and had a very good, deep chat with the CEO. And we did a deal for me to sort of remain for the next six months, help them get through some transition, and then I would go. And when I left, I was sick. I felt absolutely sick when I left. I remember standing on a chair, calling a game of bingo, I think it was, for the head office on my last day. And the CEO sort of said, look, we're going to miss you. Andy's proof that nice guys can succeed, which I felt was a lovely thing to say, because I would love to be seen as something like that. But I think it was mutual, Dan. At the end of the day, there's an ego thing there. I guess if I'd seen people around the exec table being shot overnight and the next day they weren't there, after the years I'd put in, actually, I didn't want to go out like that. I wanted to go out on my own sort of terms. But also, I can't work with anybody if I'm not adding value and if I'm not right for them. So that was a big, big trigger. And so that was a wake-up call. And then trying to do marketing as a consultant and want to be paid what I want to be paid for doing the things that they wanted me to do, it just wasn't going to work. I do love marketing. I love storytelling, but the thought of having to put marketing plans together and strategies together for the rest of my life while sitting in the corner of my living room, not going to work. The connection to the human is too strong for me. And so I do think I was very lucky at one stage of my corporate career working with some external consultants trying to help us find this link to what drives the business. and the people within it. And I spent a long time working on similar projects. I spent a long time on values and culture projects and all these sorts of things in my career. And that's where if I look back, that's where I just felt I was in flow. Those projects, they didn't feel like work to me. I lost all track of time, effort. I just loved it. And I figured, well, if I'm gonna risk earnings and I'm gonna have to kind of like fashion something out of nothing, it has to be something that I love doing. It has to be something that I'm passionate about. Then it has to be something that I'm gonna have to learn a load more stuff about it. And you've got to really love something if you really, really want to learn and grow. So I had a go, and I was very lucky to pick up a couple of clients who understood the link between culture and values and behavior, but didn't quite know how to have a go at it. And we had a bash together and we got some great results. And then it's gone from there. So today I do balance the culture, values, behavioral stuff with leadership development work. Because I genuinely think that the landscape of leadership today has to change. The old ways just are less and less effective. And I do come across like a bit of a hippie, but as I say to a lot of people I work with, listen, I love a bit of woo-woo, but that's not how I operate. Everything's got to be grounded in reality and results. But I do think we, over the last couple of decades, we lost a bit of humanity when it came to business. And for a fleeting moment in COVID, I just thought there was this huge bow wave of humanity that had come back. All of a sudden, we were looking over the neighbour's fence to make sure they were okay. We stood on the corner of the street, clapping the NHS. We were volunteering on the Good Samaritan app to go and deliver shopping to people. And all of a sudden at work, you saw people taking more interest. I remember having a cracking conversation with a guy who runs an independent agency, creative agency in London. And everything had gone digital, everything had gone Zoom and conversations. And he was the kind of guy who said, I just thought that, I knew all of my team. Every day I'd come in the office, I'd touch them, I did jazz hands and everything was cool. It wasn't until having to make contact on a one-to-one basis on a Zoom call to see how somebody really was, did I realize how disconnected I was from my people. And forcing myself, not in a bad way, to reach out, make sure people were okay, listen, understand. Honestly, the relationships that grew on the back of that were tremendous. And actually the results and the innovation that came through, and the willingness of increased discretion came through. So I think that humanity piece, it's not about stroking everybody and making them feel lovely. This is what we need as a base to properly perform. And I think when we see people, when we hear people, and when we clearly show not just that we value them, but how they add value and matter to the organization, then I think we can really make a difference.
When I asked you that question about kind of like how did you know it was time to make the change and what did that transition look like? Your initial response was, it's not a very interesting story or something to that effect. And then I've just kind of sat back, and the sort of honesty that you were able to have with yourself in recognizing that it was time for a change, the emotional connection, as you told us the story, the emotional connection you had with the people around you at that time, and knowing that you were stepping away from something not because you wanted to walk away from the people, because you were walking away that you weren't the right fit for the work for that particular season. And there was a real emotional gravitas as he talked us through that story, and a real sense of you connecting with an important transition point in your life, that as you talked us through it, and like I say, it just had this honesty, emotional gravitas. It was lovely to just kind of go on that journey with you. It was so real. So I think that was far from uninteresting. That I probably could have just let you carry on for another 40 minutes and I would have been very, very happy.
Well, I appreciate that. I really do. It's emotional because, and I know it's a big topic for you, but when Heather, my wife, and I decided we were going to have kids, we made a sort of psychological contract with each other, was that she wanted to stay at home and raise the kids, and I had the opportunity to go and earn money so that we could do stuff together. And so for many, many years, that's what I did. That was my That's what I felt my purpose was, right? Which meant I didn't have the same, and I don't have the same relationship with my kids as Heather does. It doesn't mean I don't have a great relationship with my kids. I absolutely do. I adore them. But when I came away from corporate and you have no work and you realize what you thought you were going to do isn't going to work, I completely lost my purpose. I lost all self-confidence. I lost the ability to make decisions. I lost the ability to get on with something. I procrastinated over everything. I thought, right, I really got to get back into corporate quickly, as this family's going to be in trouble. And so for me, it is an emotional thing because it's been a tough old journey. And when I sort of said, I'm living my best life, it's because of the things I get to do. I'd love to be doing more of it, but the connection to what I do today and how I feel as a person doing that work, when I look back to how I felt as a kind of almost wrung out corporate employee, and there's nothing wrong with corporate businesses. It's just, I feel different doing what I'm doing now to what I was doing before. And I have a real genuine sense of purpose. If I can help anyone have a more fulfilling work life, great, tick. I will sing show tunes in the car on the way back from an event because I'm happy. You know, that's what it means to me.
Before we jumped on this call, we had a little bit of a planning session. We talked about the culture crush you're going to talk about, and we were going to talk about 7 steps to do with company retention. Now, I don't want to flip the script on you here, Andy, but forgive me for doing this, but I'm going to make a suggestion that we park for another episode this conversation about retention and stick with what we're talking about now. Is that all right with you?
Whatever you need, my friend. Whatever you need.
Now, but I suppose it probably is good at this point to talk because it's related. I think your culture crush, as I always say, when we talk about a culture crush, we're not endorsing a whole culture or everything that a person does. We're simply shining a spotlight on something that's inspired us that we can borrow, take away, learn from, apply, whatever. And I think your culture crush is related to this theme. But after that, I've got a couple of the questions, keep pulling on the thread that we've revealed in our conversation so far. So why don't you tell us about your culture crush and why you've chosen them?
I'm such a fanboy of this, so excuse me, but I have worked quite a bit of my career in hospitality. A lot of my clients today are in hospitality. I'm a massive hospitality fan. You know, from the first days of working in a restaurant or a patisserie, I've just loved it. And so when I read Unreasonable Hospitality, Will Guidara's book, and Will Guidara may well be known by some people as one of the executive producers on Disney's The Bear, which, as an aside thing, is just one of the greatest programs. I've loved that. But I'm a massive, my culture crush is really about the team that was put together, 11 Madison Park, which was, until recently, one of the best restaurants in the world, and then was heralded as the best restaurant in the world. And Unreasonable Hospitality as a book tracks that journey, right? From turning up at the awards ceremony several years before for the top 50 restaurants in the world and sitting there expectantly and then being the very first name that's read out as 50th, which was, oh my goodness, what a letdown. And this fascination and writing on a napkin, Unreasonable Hospitality was the takeout from that. That's what's going to drive us forward. And the essence of why it's a crush for me is because the book makes the parallel between being customer obsessed, unreasonable hospitality for customers, doing the things that people just would never expect to delight them, and what journey that Will and the team went on to flip that switch, not just for customers, but for the people inside the organization. And the realization that feeling of unreasonable hospitality and doing things people don't expect to delight them was just as, if not more important for the people inside the organization to go and deliver that to the customers coming through the door. And I have, goodness me, I wish I was on commission for this book, because I have plugged it and shown it to loads of people. I did the big brave soldier thing of reaching out to Will Guidara and saying, please come on my tiny little podcast, have a chat. timing wasn't good. He'd done loads and I'm too small to get him on. But my goodness me, I would love to talk to this guy, because there are so many moments and stories within that book that you can just see why things changed so dramatically, but why it also took so long. And the great thing about this book is, whilst it's hospitality focused, as Will sort of says in the book, the lessons learned, the theory behind it can be applied to, I think, pretty much any industry. And I just love it, because the whole piece in here about a connection between empathy and human, the term servant leadership gets used a lot, right? I'm not sure I like servant, right? It's sort of, I don't know. There's something just icky about it for me. But in the book, there's a real pride of delivering a service, like a real honor, a real prestige. And I love that whole piece. There's a massive connection between vision and purpose. There's a fascinating bit in the story where there's 3 mission statements that have been used throughout the journey for 11 Madison Park. And it started really simply. I had to write these down so I'd remember them. But the first mission statement was to make New York City feel like home for people. That was just a very simple mission statement. And whether you were a native or someone visiting, in the hurly-burly world of New York City, when you walked through 11 Madison Park doors, felt like home. And that's what drove that business. And then as it started to grow, really become successful, he felt that wasn't enough. So he went into more detail, and I definitely had to write this one down because this is long, which is something of the problem. But to be the best restaurant in the world, serving the most delicious food, delivering the most gracious hospitality, and creating the most memorable experiences. I mean, comprehensive, right? Detailed, to represent the quality and the detail that went into delivering that experience. But that mission itself became overly complex. It overwhelmed the employees, put immense pressure on the team, and ended up making them lose focus. And so the third act, if you like, when it came to the purpose and vision, was to come back to something incredibly simplistic, which was to make people feel special. Based on everything that they did, and anybody who has watched The Bear, and particularly has watched the episode Forks, where one of the main characters who has no idea what he's really doing is sent to a very, very exclusive restaurant where he spends days polishing forks or trimming mushrooms, understanding the level of detail that went into great service experience. And his own personal journey in that whole episode is incredible. There's a phrase that sort of says, I wear suits now. He turns back at the sort of like meat sandwich restaurant dressed in an amazing suit after the experience. What's the matter with you? What are you doing? I wear suits now. The transformation, incredible. But that, to make people feel special on the surface of it, feels very, very simplistic and doesn't say much. But it's everything that was underneath it. And people really connected to it on both sides. So I think that's hugely important. And then the sort of final pieces around, I love this because it talks a lot about empowerment and trust. He was a micromanager and was managing stuff to the nth degree, but it wasn't until trust was there and empowerment was there that things really started to motor, and people really connected to it and really stepped up rather than just following the footsteps. And then the final lesson, I guess, of resilience and adaptability. This thing took years to get to where it did. And we've just seen 3 iterations of mission statement, right? Just because of what you've got today, if it doesn't fit with where you're headed, you need to change it. I often sit down with clients and we might be talking about values and linking behavior, or we've got these behaviors, we've had them for years, we don't really want to change them. Well, but are they working for you? Are they alive and well? Are they getting you where you need to be? Because there's no point having them, because if we change them, people will get worried. If they're not working, you change them. And you put them in place to really help you deliver. So that's a very waffly piece around 11 Madison Park and Unreasonable Hospitality. You can maybe tell it's had a little effect on me, that book, because it shared the wonderfulness of hospitality to so many more people. And I think if you took that kind of unreasonable hospitality the sort of like incredible generosity back into the workplace, I think we'd see some change.
On this show, we love to talk about leadership challenges and what people can do about them. And just in that section alone, talking about unreasonable hospitality, there is so much value and so much direction and so much applicable knowledge for leaders to take away, reflect on, and implement. So in terms of filling the culture crush brief, Andy, you've absolutely nailed it. But one thing I did want to pick up on, well, a couple of things I wanted to pick up on. I loved the point you made about when you implement steps to be unreasonably hospitable to your customers, it's not just good for the customers. The experience of doing that for someone else, it sort of reflects back onto the person who's delivering that experience. And actually, that's a beautiful dance that happens. You don't just do the thing because it's good for the customer. That act of generosity is good for the person who's being generous. And I love that idea of that being a reciprocal experience. It's not just output, it is also input for the person who's being generous. And I think that speaks to the idea of servant leadership. And I'm going to take a slight segue here for a moment, because I think the term servant leadership, this is my kind of Christian church upbringing coming out. I can't say with certainty where this turn of phrase started, but I certainly remember growing up in church with this idea of servant leadership and it being attached to a particular story in the Bible where Jesus is with the 12 disciples and they're moving towards the Easter story, the crucifixion of Jesus. And Jesus takes a towel and he ties it around his waist and he gets a bowl of water and he begins to wash the disciples' feet. Now, for these 12 guys, this would have been an absolute shock. You remember that the disciples, if you don't know, they're kind of like sort of nobodies that Jesus picks up along the way and sees something in them and goes, do you know what? I think you're a good egg. You come and travel with me and let's walk together, learn together, serve together. So these weren't like special people at all. They're just common guys. And so when the person they saw as their leader took the lowest position in the household of washing feet, because remember, these guys would all have had sandals, it was dusty, it was pretty mucky. The idea of the leader washing your feet was like contrarian, completely out there. No one had ever done this before. This was kind of like eye-opening. This is crazy. Like, why is this happening? And the illustration that Jesus is making is that we're called to serve. Like, no job is beneath me. I can get on my hands and knees and I can play the role of servant and wash your feet, even though you view me as your leader. And so it was this amazing kind of countercultural story that kind of sets the tone about who Jesus was asking the disciples to be. And so I think that's where this kind of like term servant leadership really came from. And it really speaks to this idea of unreasonable hospitality, this idea of going against the grain, doing the thing that is completely countercultural, doing the thing that is like unheard of, that's so surprising, that's so moving, and that invites people to do the same, that sets the standard about what we would like to see from other human beings. So I think that's just a really interesting thought, but come on in.
No, I think it's just, I get it. I mean, there's a wonderful piece in The Bear. It's a story many people will probably know, but you know, there's so much detail in researching customers coming through, so much detail when they're coming through and, you know, their social media is being watched, all the rest of it. A group come to the table to Chicago, everything's been delayed. They haven't had a chance to go to this. They had this dream of going to this particular pizza restaurant to have one of these world famous pizzas, but they're in this Michelin star restaurant instead eating. And they know this, and they go out down the road, order a pizza, bring the pizza, serve it back on the desk, and that's it. You know, on the table is a box of pizza, and from down the road in a Michelin star restaurant. And you're like, what? But the reaction of those people who feel totally seen and looked after it's unreasonable. And I think the thing for me that I pick up on what you talk about servant leadership, it's setting a very clear message through behavior that this is what we do. This is what's acceptable here. Go get it. Go do your own. We might say freedom within a framework or whatever it might now, but freedom within a framework without clear vision and purpose is just chaos. And I think this is what's fascinating about this book and relates entirely to what you sort of talked about. When people today, maybe sometimes when they think about servant leadership or they're making the transition from manager to leader, they get a little conflated and they think it's about me doing the job of the guys on the floor all the time. And I don't think it is about that. I mean, it's great when people are in the doo-doo, shall we say, in hospitality service, and it's, all hands to the pump. Yeah, get in, help. But it's not all about that. Your job when you lead is to set clear vision and behavior and allow other people to grow. It's not to do everything for them. And so I think when it comes to my particular issue with servant leadership, I don't want it to feel like that low grade stuff. I want it to feel like a real. That's why I like the thing about pride and honor that come with it within the book. That's my position, I think.
Yeah, before we move on, I think I just want to kind of take a moment just to offer people a little bit of a challenge here, though, right? So we're talking about unreasonable hospitality. We're sort of navigating around this idea and its complexities around servant leadership. But I want to offer a little challenge to everybody listening right now. What is the symbol of service, of unreasonable hospitality? What's the foot washing exercise that you can demonstrate with your people today, the people that you're either in a relationship with or people that you're leading? Like, what is the thing that you can do to welcome them into the idea of service, to illustrate something different, to model a new approach on these old ideas, to break free from the hierarchies and structures that you may feel that you're struggling against, and do the thing that, what's the small act of defiance, if you will, that people aren't expecting, that's going to set the tone for what service and kindness and goodness and benevolence looks like where you work. Doesn't have to be grand. Maybe it's the fact that you as the leader, maybe you're the one who goes and gets all the coffees instead of the intern. I don't know. But maybe it's just as simple as doing something like that. Try and look for today. What's that little thing, that little small act of defiance that goes against the grain that you can do? Now, we're sort of nearing the end of our time together, which is a great shame because it's been such a rich and wealthy and joyous conversation. So thank you. I do want to just say to Will Guidara, you're probably not going to hear this, but Andy and I, we live in hope, and we would both love to have a conversation with you. So hopefully this makes its way to you. We'd love to have a conversation with you about unreasonable hospitality. You know from this conversation that it's going to be a really rich and joyous conversation. So come and join us. I'd love to hear from you. But for this last section, there were two things that I observed from our conversation, right? Well, one theme that I've observed from the two different chapters of our conversation. You stepping out of the corporate world, stepping into your own business, bringing all those family questions with you, bringing those questions around what does success look like, facing into the idea that your original idea for your consultancy wasn't really going to move forward, wasn't the right fit. And then in the second chapter, we've got this idea of unreasonable hospitality, which clearly lights you up, which is full of rich leadership challenges and tidbits for people to take away and try. And we've also got this idea of service and what that means and what that looks like to really put the humans around you first and set a new tone for the invitation for them to join in and in that spirit of service and unreasonable hospitality. And I've been playing with this idea recently of struggling visionaries. People like you and I who've perhaps been in corporate roles and then found that we don't feel like we're kind of the right fit here anymore. We're trying to set up our own businesses. We're trying to invite other people on a journey of cultural transformation. And that's a tough road. If you're building something, it can be lonely. If you're a team leader and you're struggling against the system that you're a part of, but you are longing for transformation, that can be difficult. And so I think this idea of a struggling visionary really applies to you and your story. And I don't want to project my how I feel onto you, but I feel that and I sense that. And I'd like, as we bring this episode to a close, to focus on something practical, tangible that other struggling visionaries can take away and try and focus on. Now, I know that this is off the cuff and unprepared, but reflect on your own story and these ideas of unreasonable hospitality. What do you want the other struggling visionaries to hear and take away and try who are listening or watching this episode right now?
I think there's a definite piece here about honest reflection. And that is really understand your own story. And by that, I mean, don't try and do, like we talked about at the start of the show, if you're in this space, you'll probably go, well, what's my statement? What's my elevator pitch to someone who's going to buy me? Whilst those things are useful and important, I think in order to do any great work, you've got to come from a very, very solid base. So I think really understanding and articulating what your real story is and how that influences what you need to do today. So I think the first thing I would say is create that, lean into that story, that self-story. I then think coming out of that is, well, what purpose does it show? You've just used the term lights you up. I think, when you're running on your own, if you aren't jazzed by what you're doing, if it feels mundane, and this is just me, again, I don't want to project anybody else, but I think, what is it that lights you up? What is it that fulfills you? There's a wonderful free resource. If you go to sparketype.com, it's a really interesting sort of psychometric that measures, it measures what sort of tasks, what sort of activities will give you real energy, life force, help you get into flow more often. It identifies that primary sparketype, a secondary sparketype, which they call the shadow, and an anti, the one that drains you. I think if you're struggling to figure out what it is you want to do and how you want to do it, take that test and have a look at what it says. So if you've got a great story and you understand where your fire comes from, then pulling that together in a purpose, I think is really, really, really important. I do then think, and maybe this is my own needy personality, I think you have to go and tell those stories and look for your first followers, the people who get and have a similar outlook to you, but don't necessarily know how to get there, and partner with those people. Because if at the start of your journey, you're having to battle with people to get them to see the same way and come with you, resilience is going to be hard at that point, I think. So find those first followers. And the final piece is to stick with the face. I think if you've done those first two pieces, if you've aligned and found yourself some first followers, then I think crack on, keep going, because eventually things start to happen. I always think, and maybe it's just my business, and maybe your word struggling is correct. People who have never tried to do their own thing will say to you, in about a year, Andy, everything will be fine. They've never done it. They've never experienced it. Some people will say, it's 3 years. It'll take you 3 years to sort of like really nail it, and away you go. I'm 6 years in. Maybe I'm awful, but I am still learning every day. I'm nowhere near the number and range of clients that I want to work with in my life, but it's a continuous process. I was obsessed a few weeks ago with the Olympics, the incredible stories you saw playing out on the TV every day, but the consistent message that seemed to be there, which really resonated with me, is doesn't matter what happened today, because tomorrow I'm just going to be a little bit better. And I don't know whether that ramble hits the brief of the sort of like off the cuff question, but I think that's what I would say. Those are the sort of 5 things that I would maybe recommend.
Andy, your compassion and your heart has been just on show throughout this whole episode. And it's been such a warming experience for me to have this conversation with you. And I really hope that everybody listening is having that same emotional response to you in things that you're saying. Does your answer hit the brief 100%? There's some really practical things in there for us to try. The sparketype.com personality test, go and try that out. And I think what you're saying about story and purpose very much aligns with something that I talk about all the time, which is the model of collective fluency: intention, action, outcome. What is the intention? What's the thing that you're going for? What's your sense of calling or vocation, right? Start there. And then once you kind of begin to bring some shape to that, what are the actions that you need to take to bring that to life? Start with those kind of steps to begin steering yourself towards the future that you're yearning for. And the other point you made, which I think is so crucial, is once you get a sense of what that story is, practice it with a few people. See if you can find a few followers who can go on that journey with you. And as you practice the story, it may evolve and adapt and change, and that's okay. We need to go on that journey of discovery. So it has been such a wonderful conversation, so rich. We need to get back together to keep pulling on some of these threads, because I think that we have just started a much longer conversation. And I can't wait to continue that with you, if you'd be willing to come back, of course, Andy.
Always, Dan, always. You're an absolute smasher. And I can't think of a single conversation that we've had where I'm like, okay, next conversation. It's always leaves you thinking. It always leaves you going, my goodness me, I talk a lot and I could talk a lot longer. So any opportunity to do it again, my friend, sign me up.
Andy, officially, thank you so much for making some time for Culture Crush. And let's make sure we speak again soon.
My absolute pleasure. Love what you're doing, my friend. Keep doing it.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Culture Crush. If you've enjoyed your time with us, please like and subscribe wherever you're listening from. And if you're a Culture First leader, be sure to visit anthem.oo because we've got lots in common. See you next time.